Welcome to Conflict Managed. I'm your host, Mary Brown. Conflict Managed is a weekly podcast about toxic work environments and how to fix them. We're glad you're here. Good morning, Alan, and welcome to Conflict Managed.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. This is great.
I'm so delighted to have you. You are a local legend where I live, and I'm very excited to hear about how you got to be where you are, and in a very tough industry. But before we get there, I would like to hear about the first job you ever had as a young person.
Excellent. Very first job, Wendy's grill man. I remember being very scared, nervous that our local Wendy's had just gotten a new management. They had brought in like tough guy, military, flat top, kind of guy. And so he intimidated me really, really a whole lot. And I came in with the attitude, it's like, hey, I'm going to be the best grillman you've ever had or you have currently. And while I messed up and made a bunch of mistakes, of course, because I was 16, I ultimately did become one of the best, if not the best, guy at the grill. And so I actually have a lot of fond memories of that job, even though it was really hard work, really stressful. But that's typically restaurant.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's interesting that you had this perception of how your boss, your manager was going to be. Was he sort of this military, really harsh by the books kind of person, or how did that play out? And how did you, given your personality, respond to that?
He was very strict but fair. He wasn't just some, over the top military guy. He looked like one, but he was strict but fair. You follow the rules and you did your job and you got praise and he could laugh and have a good time and stuff as long as everything was getting done. And I have definitely um lived by that mantra, so to speak, over my career of it's okay to goof around as long as we're getting it done.
Mm.
A little bit, not a ton of goofing around, but I'm saying it's okay to have a little fun at work as long as we're getting it done.
It
So
is interesting, strict but fair. Um, that conjures a lot for me. Because I really do prize knowing what the rules are, knowing what the guidelines are, wanting to make sure that they are enforced, but also with grace, right? So that
sure.
that fairness, that human element, along with having the guide rails, so that we're all going in the same direction. And in food, it seems very, very important for the high pressure, the quality, all that's involved.
Absolutely. When you're in a restaurant, you have lots of people from all walks of life. You have very young people, and you have some older people that have been in the industry for a long time. And you often get these guys and gals while you're training them. They want to try to do things something a little easier, maybe. And even that little tiny tweak that makes things easier can evolve your food
Mm.
over time. It's kind of like a game of password.
Mm.
So one person starts doing it one way, and then they teach the next person how to do it, and they cut a corner, and next thing you know, all the corners are cut, and your food is really evolved, and it's a completely different product.
That is so interesting because when I think about a healthy work environment and I think about engagement, right, we want people to use their minds and to be creative. And a lot of times, frontline workers see that maybe the person who's not working the grill in their mind, and maybe when they did it 20 years ago, this was the most efficient way, but they're not doing it with this equipment in this time. And so, oh, I've got this innovative idea, I'm going to implement it. And I think that's very laudable. And yet, many times when we just do that in isolation, the person who is doesn't see all the other steps down the way. So I know that you work in the food industry, right? That's what you do. I mean, so how do you see that wanting to get the perspective of the person who's doing it day in and day out and what they think is not working well, but in harnessing that, but also having them see this big picture of like, well, you don't think it works well, but we have to have it this way, as you said, for the domino effect.
Sure, that happens a lot. Actually, we get a lot of people that want to give tips and ideas for new products and things like that. Well, I'm a pretty slow changer. I don't like quick change. I have a if it's not broke, don't fix it mentality. But I always allow anybody that wants to talk to me about ideas or things that they could think are better. And we have found tons of management that have come up with these ideas that have helped us out. So when a really good idea does happen, they talk about it, we implement it. And we reward our employee for that too. We'll give them some kind of reward. It may be a raise, it may be just a gift card to a local place or something, just to say, hey, that was a great idea, I'm glad you did that. Um, but the other way around, lots of times I have to tell people, hey, we can't do that because of this,
Mhm.
whatever. Well, there's reasons behind everything we do. And that's part of our success, is that everything, most of the time, has had a lot of deep thought behind it. And usually multiple brains behind it, not just mine. There's been lots of brains thinking about it. And I have to explain that to them. And sometimes, young kids could have delicate, fragile egos, and they don't take that the right way always. But it is always, I always come from a place from the heart when I talk to them. I'm not just like raw, mad, kind of thing. But sometimes it does discourage people.
Yeah, feedback is interesting, right? We all, in the abstract, I'm sitting here with you right now, and I say, yeah, I want to hear feedback from my clients. I want to hear feedback from this person. And then you get it. And when it's not favorable, it can be very hard. It can feel like, oh, this person misunderstood me, or, the world online. I post online, you post online, or you get reviews. And it's an awful feeling to be misunderstood because we really do want to be seen and given the benefit of the doubt. And sometimes, depending on how the feedback comes up to us, and depending on where we are in our own stage of development, it can feel difficult. And yet, we, I think that we pretty much all know that we aren't perfect and we do have room
Sure.
to grow. And that the only way to grow is I'm going to keep on making those mistakes until somebody tells me, you've been misspelling this word for 20 years. Like, oh man, could you not have told me the
Yeah,
first time I did it?
absolutely. Some of that feedback, I get a lot of feedback. Everywhere I go, people want to give me some kind of feedback. It could be an employee, it could be a patron, it could be, a guest, or it could be just a friend or whatever. It's like constant feedback. And so it's not always positive. And, it took some time to get over that because, you put so much heart and passion into what you've made. So sometimes when someone gives you some feedback and it's negative, it hurts. It's like, ugh. It's like if I get a 1-star review, it's like, ugh, it kills me every time because I know we tried to do it right, but what did we do to drop the ball for this particular guest or something like that? So I call it getting punched in the face by the restaurant. Sometimes the restaurant will punch you in the face and you have to take it. And it happens a lot, actually. So I refer to it. If you hear me say getting punched in the face, I talk to my managers about it. It's like sometimes the restaurant's just going to punch you in the face and you just got to take it.
Yeah.
And there's no other way to call it anything else. It may sound a little brutal or whatever, but it just is what it is.
It seems, especially in this day and age, is part and parcel of living any sort of public life. So if you're a business owner, you're living a public life to the people that you're serving, to the people who are your patrons, and they're going to have opinions because they're frequenting you, they're spending their own money and their time, and because you are in the food industry, people are celebrating these milestones with you. So it's all this, a lot of important things that are happening for them. And so getting all this feedback. So if you think back to your first job, your 16-year-old self versus yourself today, how have you been able to grow and develop with understanding what feedback is, what to take, what not to take, and how to remain sane through that process?
Sure, I struggle with that still. Yeah, it goes back to just kind of you need to. Sorry, I'm having a hard time articulating this thought.
It's fine.
One of the things about feedback is that at first, every single time I got any negative feedback, it was just crushing. And like I
Mm.
said, it still stings, but it used to just crush me. And I had to get over that in order to grow. Because ultimately, when you look back at what you've done and what your team is doing and what you've trained your team and to do, you're training them to do it right. It's just somewhere along the way we dropped the ball. Somebody missed the mark, or multiple. Usually, it's a group of people missing the mark. It's like, okay, this person dropped the ball, the server dropped the ball, and then the manager didn't catch it, and then I didn't get the manager ready for this particular type of thing. I mean, you never know what's going to happen in the restaurant industry. It is the ultimate Murphy's Law. And we've had a deer jump through a window at one of our restaurants. So if you don't believe that Murphy's Law exists, it does.
I've seen the footage. Yes. So let's go back a little bit. So after Wendy's, where did you go after that?
After that, I went to Marriott Catering. It's now Sodexo, but it used to be Marriott Catering, and that was my next job. I did that for about a year. It was a lot of hard work. I was 17 to 18 years old, and we did events at the UTM, major events, small events, country clubs. Basically just typical serving stuff. I didn't cook or anything. It was just all catering serving. So I had to wear a nice shirt and serve tea, and it wasn't a lot of communication with the guests. It was just mostly serving, and
Have,
it was a good job.
have most of your jobs been in the food and service industry?
Yes, almost all of them. I've dabbled with graphic design, and that's why I have some design background. But most of everything I've ever done, and everything my parents ever done, and everything my wife has ever done, has been food.
It's the hospitality industry. I mean, the name itself, right? It's so important and it's such a part of the fabric of our communities, in our lives, but it is a hard master. So, why that road? Why has hospitality called your name that you've been doing it and investing so much of yourself in it?
It kind of started off as I was a bit of a leaf on the wind kind of thing. And I didn't take to school very well. I didn't do very well in school. And it was just the way I learned. And, I didn't like homework. I went to college for a short while and dropped out. That didn't work for me. And essentially, my mom was working at Long John Silver's for a very long time, 27 years. And her company, which was a corporate store, got bought out by a franchisee. And this is actually a very long story. I'm going to keep it as short as possible. But it got bought out, and the guy who bought it out didn't treat women very fairly. And this caused her a tremendous amount of stress. She started hating her job. And of course, dad noticed it. And then, he's like, we got to do something for your mom and yada, yada. And that started leading us to talking about, he said, let's open a restaurant for her to run. And next thing you know, we had rented the building where Sammies is, and we started doing a bunch of research and working, and we created Sammies. And there was definitely a lot of luck in there, but there was a lot of work too, a lot of research and investigating what other guys are doing and blah 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 blah. And we opened up and lines out the door, and it was chaos, and I still can't believe it. And so that whole thing, my dad had worked in the restaurant industry his whole life. He'd worked at Pizza Hut for many, many years. He opened the Pizza Hut in Paducah, Kentucky. And then my wife worked at KFC and Subway. And when I was living in Memphis going to college, I worked at a steak place where I was a grillman there. But most of all of our experience is fast food experience. So that's why Sammy's was kind of this quick service restaurant, at first.
And since then, you have opened another Sammy's in the town over and two additional restaurants in Martin, Tennessee. So, just so some of the listeners, we have an international listening
Cool.
body here. Um, so, when you opened Sammy's and you thought about, because I'm very interested in, I do conflict at work, or conflict management in work environment, how to have a healthy work environment. When you think about when you first opened Sammy's and managing that crew versus how you manage today, specifically for the health and well-being of the people that you employ, how has your leadership style changed? What have you learned since the first restaurant you opened?
Sure. Some of the things I've learned is how to find toxicity and get it out of your
Mm,
restaurant or your business. And that can be very difficult, and that can be also a very painful lesson to relearn over and over because
mm,
the more restaurants you have, the more likely you can have someone who's toxic in your restaurant. And, it's hard to spot these people because a lot of times people, will give you a fake version of themselves when you're interviewing them for a job. And then the truth comes out 90 days later, so to speak. But rooting out toxicity is very hard. But we've learned a lot over the years of how to find it, how to root it out. And other things that we do is we a lot of the things that we do is try to keep toxicity from happening. So not everybody's just toxic. Just because toxicity appears doesn't mean a person is necessarily toxic. Maybe just something they're doing is toxic and they have no idea.
mhm.
It's very natural for people to talk about other people, right? And we have a lot of rules at work, and we call it the chain of command. And it's similar to how the military does chain of command. And it is, essentially, if you're on the same level as another employee, right? So if you're a shift manager and you're talking to another shift manager about any other shift manager or any other standard employee below them, that is acceptable. When one shift manager comes up and starts talking about the GM with another shift manager, that is a chain of command violation, right? And so we don't allow our employees to talk really to talk bad about each other at all. We try to avoid that in any case, but it does happen. But we try to abide by this chain of command that helps us root out toxicity, if that makes any sense.
Gosh, I absolutely love that because I love that you get started basically with saying gossip is kind of natural. It happens. And I agree. It's going to happen and it's going to happen for a variety of ways. It may not start out as toxic, but it can quickly turn that way if their standards aren't put in place. And so anybody out there, if there is gossip, it's being allowed and tolerated, right?
Mm-hmm.
Prolonged gossip, right? And gossip is specifically, talking trash about somebody, kicking somebody when they're down. It's not how do I deal with this problem to move forward, but it is, as you said, this negative, bringing about this toxic, poisonous environment.
Absolutely.
And I just absolutely love that because I hear people say, well, it's just the way things are. No, 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 it's the way you have allowed it to be. As you know, more than I know, it's not easy, but it's
No,
the alternative is worse.
absolutely. I mean, it can only get worse, and you can have a whole mutiny over a misunderstanding.
Yes.
And we do tell our employees, hey, if it's illegal or immoral, definitely tell us.
Right.
If you see someone stealing, I want to know.
Right.
And, if you do see someone doing something awful like sexual harassment or something, we need to know. We can't fix it if we don't know, type thing. But other than that, if it's not illegal or immoral, if someone comes up and says, I'm not going to use real names, but Sally, my GM, is doing this. I'd be like, you need to worry about your job. I'll handle Sally. She's doing exactly what she needs to be doing. And then, I'll be observing, or someone on my team will be observing Sally and see, or go talk to her and find out, is there really anything going on? No, it's just somebody got upset that their shift got cut because they weren't doing a very good job.
Mhm.
You know, Someone was on the floor and maybe they got observed being not rude, but not our level of hospitality, and their hours got cut, or they got turned into a food runner instead of a server because they didn't get to the level that we expect, kind of thing. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I mean, every person, for the most part, is the hero of their story, and they've got a reason why X, Y, or Z, right? And so, when somebody, again, back to this feedback, when somebody says, well, you know, this is a consequence of your action. Well, it's not me, it's you, right? And so then that can quickly turn to gossip if there isn't a way to talk to people, tell people transparency, like when people don't know why or what, or both why and what, then they're going to naturally talk to one another. And of course, people want connection. So if we don't give people a way to connect, sometimes people will do it in this particular way because gossip is a way to to build connection. It just
Sure.
happens to do it in the negative way instead of the positive way.
Sure. And we use these opportunities as well. When someone starts being toxic, we don't just fire them. We coach them up. We always call it coaching up. And if they accept this coaching, they're typically more in line to be able to become a manager because that's what we are ultimately looking for are people that trust us. They believe in what we believe in ourselves, our whole team, and they're able to be coached and trained and to the next level, to get to the next level. And a lot of times restaurant business isn't a career for these people. They're young kids, they're going to college, or maybe it's just an in-between type job. But if they can accept the coaching, right? If they cannot do the thing, no, I'm right, you're wrong. If they cannot do that, then they have a lot of potential to move up in our company.
Mm.
So we're always looking for people that are able to be coached because even though sometimes people say they are or act like they are, they're not really being coached. They're not accepting it. They're saying, uh-huh. And then you walk away and they're like, that guy's an idiot or that gal's an idiot. You know what I mean? It
Right.
happens. It happens real.
Absolutely. I love that you said being able to be coachable because whether or not you're in any place as a long-term career, every employer is looking for someone who is coachable, whether it is a blue collar, white collar, whatever kind of collar job it is, that you are engaged, that you are invested, that you recognize you can learn and grow. All of us are lifelong learners, at least if we want to stay gainfully employed and move up in our careers. And so
Sure.
learning that skill, college can teach you a variety of things, or trade school can teach you a variety of things, but that character trait of, really developing it within yourself of I want to be better. And this is an opportunity. And why don't I try on whatever my manager is saying? Try it. I mean, first of all, I am not in charge, which for me, that's a bitter pill to swallow. Because everywhere I think I've got these great ideas, but sometimes I have to say, Mary, okay, yeah, but you're not in charge. They're in charge. You can do X, Y, and Z and then accept it or go someplace else, move along, or just kind of breathe in it and allow other people to do their work. So this idea of being coachable is this attitude that is just invaluable anywhere you go. You will rise no matter where you are if you're coachable and competent.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's very important and probably, I don't know a lot about your typical corporate environments, but I'm sure that it definitely applies. And being coachable and moldable to fit the company can really help you out to move up the ladder, if that's your thing, if that's what you want to do. Or it could help you go to another company and grow there or quickly grow there because you've learned so much at one company. I always tell people about the story of me working at Wendy's because a lot of people think that because we have so many restaurants and some of them are, one of them, at least one or two of them are pretty grandiose type restaurants, that, we just were born with money and kind of thing. And it's all been just a ton of hard work and risk. And, I tell them, I was like, when I worked at Wendy's and I worked at Stakeout in Memphis, Tennessee, and some of these other places, I took things that I learned from these giant corporations that had already done all the science, and all the work and applied them to my restaurants. Not exactly. We're not cooking Wendy's burgers at the grind. We're cooking something else. But I learned a lot of stuff from that. I learned how a burger kitchen should flow and things like that. And that's a big part of our success is because we've had so many brains that have been in that corporate fast food environment that have learned how these giant companies have made things streamlined. And it helps us streamline our own restaurants.
So when you think about that approach, I'm sure your experience, your mother and your father
Hmm.
and your wife and everybody else's experience in these other food environments and how they were treated for ill and for good by the management and by the other people there have also shaped the structure you have right now, which is pretty intentional, very employee focused on how do we have the structure, maintain it, promote, and have a healthy work environment. I mean, if you were using the words like to find and root out toxicity, and to coach, and to try to get people to manage up, and so how did that morph from your first restaurant at Sammy's, or did it just come like, hey, this is what we're going to do, and you did it from the beginning?
At the beginning, when Sammy's first started, I worked in the restaurant just to get it off the ground. It was kind of my rule with my dad was like, all right, I'll help us build this restaurant, but and invest in it and all this stuff, but I do not want to work it. And obviously you have to work your restaurant at the beginning, no matter what. It's all hands on deck. It can get crazy. And people don't care if it's your first day or your 10th day or your 10,000th day. They want their food, they want it fresh, and they want smiles and everybody be nice and all that kind of stuff. So it's all hands on deck. But after that, my mom managed that store, and I learned some stuff from my dad because I didn't have corporate management experience. I worked in these restaurants, but I wasn't manager. I was always a cook, right? I was always some version of a cook.
Mhm.
So my father and my mother managed all that. Once Sammy's got going, my dad and I focused on the Facebook and marketing and type thing, and then we opened, of course, Sammy's too, and so on and so forth, and mom was kind of managing both of them with our assistants, but it wasn't a lot of corporate management for myself. I had to learn that. Read books about the 1 Minute Manager and a bunch of other books, Setting the Table with Danny Meyer, and which are fantastic reads if you're in the restaurant business. And a lot of the other things are just based on experiences that happened, and then we started learning how to be pro-reactive instead of just reactive.
Mm.
And that's what kind of led to these systems that I'm talking about. It's trying to be pro-reactive. How do we stop these toxic things from happening, um, because of a misunderstanding, essentially. I've
Mhm.
had people get mad because their payroll fell through. They didn't get paid when they were supposed to. They got paid the day after. We fixed it, but stuff happens, and they get really mad. And then next thing we got people on Facebook saying they don't pay their workers, and I'm like, yes, we do. So we've these experiences help us learn and how to keep them from happening as often. But Murphy's Law, anything can happen.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. A lot of conflicts come about because of a misunderstanding, and then somebody doesn't know what to do with it, or depending on just where they are in their own development, what the impact it has on them. So, this I love this desire to see it as soon as possible to deal with it so that it doesn't grow. That's what I say about conflict. Early, often, swiftly, justly. Unfortunately, when somebody calls me in, it's because usually something has blown up. But I'm such a big believer in having the system because things are going to happen. Whether it's a
Mm-hmm.
restaurant business, maybe more, but wherever you are, there's going to be conflicts, there are going to be mistakes, there's going to be just different of ideas. And so to deal with those things and to have the systems in place to deal with those things so that they don't bloom, you gave a really good, already a really good example of looking for gossip and having the structure such that we're not talking about people in this negative way here. Is there anything else that you have developed about seeing things that contribute to miscommunication or issues at work that you can be proactive about?
Yes, texting. Um, Texting can cause lots of problems. We use it. We use group chats for all of our work, but I always implement or say in these group chats, it's like, hey, let's don't be so opinionated in a group chat. If you've got big opinions, pick up the phone and call.
Mm.
Right? You got opinions about something because once you kind of create these opinionated gossip group chats, okay, they can devolve quickly, right?
Mhm.
Whereas if you and I are talking, it's a lot harder to devolve the conversation because you can hear the inflections in my voice and see my facial expressions. Or if we're not on the phone, I'm saying if it's person, actual FaceTime. But texting can be a huge, helpful thing. So like what I mean by that is in our group chats, we're having them post about the labor and this is how many of this type of sandwich we sold, for example, if it's a Sammy of the month type thing, or uh you know this equipment is breaking down, it's acting funky, or whatever. That's what we use them for. If you allow to, in my opinion, if you allow to have these big gossipy or brainstorming text groups, they can devolve and people can get upset. And because you don't see their facial expression or hear the inflection of the voice, you don't even know they're upset.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? It's all about how you interpret that text message, and every single person is going to interpret it differently. And you see this on social media because a
Mm.
lot of it is, people behind a keyboard saying something, and maybe they weren't meaning to be snarky, but it came off that way. So we are always dancing around that as much as possible. But
Mm.
in today's day and age, you can't control it necessarily because there's probably whole group chats full of our employees, that we don't even know about. And they're just in there, it happens. It's nothing we can do about it.
You mentioned a variety of really good things there. First is you control what you can control. You do what
Absolutely.
you do. So you do what you do so that you get those 5-star reviews. And when you get the one or the disgruntled whoever, then you deal with it, right?
Yep.
You do your best, you show up. And that's when things are make things go well. And when they don't go well, then you do damage control, right? But you can only control what you can control. And so you can control your group text chats and talk about the reason why we're going to do this. But I think that's so wise because in this age of communication, there's so much miscommunication. And text is wonderful because if somebody were to call you and say, this is broken, these are this many sandwiches, this needs to be attended to, it's just a lot of stuff. And it's likely that something can be forgotten or not heard in the right way, or I got the wrong piece of equipment. But if it's like itemized in a text, it's just really straightforward. But if
Mm-hmm.
you're talking about something of substance or an actual issue that isn't just sort of technical or numbers oriented, texting, as you said, is just not the right place. And so we have to pay attention to the medium in which we're communicating, or we or we're going to be open to all of this miscommunication. I was just thinking
Absolutely.
about what you said about payroll, about somebody not getting paid, let's suppose on the 10th when that's when they were expecting, and because of a mistake, it came out on the 11th. I heard your story, and in no way did I think that you're like, oh, who cares? You got it a day late. No, that would, but I could imagine a text conversation where someone could be like, what I shouldn't be able to be expected to get paid when you say, like, and you're defending yourself, and that can so easily spin out of control
Absolutely.
because of everything that you said. And so communication is so key to having a healthy work environment.
I completely agree. I still harp on this to some of our managers. I'm like, you know why that happened? Is because you guys texted too much about it.
Mm.
Pick up the phone, call, and you guys can talk to each other and not have these little conflicts that can spiral into something deeper, right?
Mhm.
And usually since they're a manager, they're able to be coached and they accept that coaching. And they're like, yeah, you know
Right.
what, you're right. I should be doing that.
Yeah.
And I genuinely believe that they are trying to do that, and that's why they're usually in a management position.
Mhm.
So yeah, texting can be a huge boon, but it can also be a huge wound in your business. It can just mess you up.
Yeah. And independent of what your business is, it's so important to think about the ways in which you're communicating, that everybody understands we're using these different modes for these different reasons. And I'm writing a book right now on generational gaps at work. And because I'm interested in well, how do we have a healthy work environment? Realizing that we're going to have generations. And of course, in the restaurant business, you have all these different generations working
Hmm.
together, right? And then you've got
Hmm.
management in different places as well. So, and communication, how people communicate, the words in which they use to communicate can cause these unnecessary conflicts. So some conflicts, I mean, conflict is not bad. It can be very good, be very creative and fruitful, but those unnecessary conflicts can easily be avoided if we learn how to communicate depending on our the mode, but also the generational issues, really considering how do I communicate to that person?
Absolutely. I completely agree to that. As I'm getting older, I'm 42 years old. I now am part of a generation gap. I used to be much closer to the younger people that worked in our restaurants, and now I'm getting older, and I definitely see the difference between generations. But a lot of it, the younger generation, they love that texting so much, and I love texting. I'm on my phone constantly texting someone about something, work or not work, but um, they love all that stuff, and they love communicating in a unique way that the internet, I think, has changed the way people communicate just as a whole, because these people have grown up from infancy to adulthood with the internet, whereas my generation, I'm an exennial. My generation, had a childhood without the internet. And then in my teens, 14, 15, I started getting the internet, which was a lot different than it is now, back then. So I think the generation gap is very important to understand when it comes to communicating, is what I'm trying to say.
Mhm.
Um, but, it could be one of those things that you can't totally grasp until you realize that one of your managers who's 58 years old is dealing with a 19-year-old server, and they're really far apart and they're really struggling to communicate, and you've got to figure out how to be in the middle
Mhm.
to make them understand, hey, this guy or gal is your boss. You have to do what they say as long as it's not illegal or moral, and there's nothing wrong with that. Sometimes people think the lines are grayed when they're not.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And
They're like,
vice
that's
versa.
not in
Yeah.
my job title. I'm like, well, you're a server. You still have to sweep underneath the table that you served. You know what I mean? I
Right.
mean, that's a real thing.
Sure. Yeah. And I imagine too, I mean, in every place there are the reverse where the manager is younger than the person that they manage. And that can cause its own bag of worms. But let me talk to you about this, about conflict. So you as a person, in your life and in your work, especially when you were a younger person, how did you deal with conflict, at work? If you want to tell us a story about a conflict that you had and how you dealt with it, and that now that you're farther along in your career, how you might have dealt with it differently if you would have.
Um, Quickly, just off the top of my head, I can think of a time when we were opening the grind, and our GM, and she was thrusted into being the GM because of a whole nother story. She was just going to be a shift leader, and then the actual GM, who was an older woman, literally walked out day one because it was so busy, she couldn't handle it. And so, like I said, it was all hands on deck. I was in the kitchen the whole time, so I wasn't in the front of the house. My dad was in the front of the house. My mom was in the front of the house. Like I said, it was so crazy busy. But anyways, this woman who is now our area manager, she manages all of our restaurants over the top. Um, she was just falling into this GM role, really young too at the time. She was like 23 years old,
Mm.
right? Really young. And her and I had a miscommunication in person. And it all stemmed over, apparently, I kind of scoffed during a conversation. Okay. All of this happened over me going like, that's it, and I didn't know about it. But this whole thing, she thought that I was secretly so mad at her over a mistake that she made, right? And that it built into something that it wasn't over
Mm.
time. until this person almost quit. And I had to sit down with them and have a conversation with them. We all sat down, had a conversation. And I was like, hey, I was in the moment when I huffed or scoffed or whatever. It has no reflection on you. And I'm the type of person that you always know where you stand with me. Okay.
Mm,
I'm always going to tell you exactly where you stand with me. Hey, you're messing up here. Hey, you're doing a great job. I'm going to tell you in the moment, right then and there. I was in the moment. It wasn't something that was, you know, that I secretly don't like you and think that you're doing a horrible job all the time. But this affected her confidence, obviously, and it made her kind of go into a downward spiral, right? Where
mhm,
she was doing worse and worse because she was constantly afraid of
mhm,
that. And so I guess in order to kind of answer your question, because I know I'm saying a lot of words here, but I wish I could have realized that that was happening in that moment and maybe just immediately said, hey, that wasn't for you. That was just my own internal stress that I'm a way I dealing with my own internal stress. Um, but having said that, ultimately she was coachable from that moment,
mhm,
right? And she grew from a position where she was making very little money to now she's being the area manager of $4 million restaurants or multi-million-dollar restaurants.
mhm.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that if she wasn't as coachable as she is, that could have immediately been she quit over that whole little scoff or huff or whatever I sound I made because actually a big deal. Like I didn't realize it at the time. She was really upset about it, but part of it was because of that generation gap. She's much younger than me, so I hope that kind of answered your question.
I love that because it illustrates a variety of things. If you roll your eyes at me, I think it's about me. You're saying something about me. You're being disrespectful to me. It could be like there's something in your eye. It could be you're rolling your eye about something that you're thinking about before. It could be you have no idea you're doing it. It could be that you are being disrespectful, right? Like
Absolutely.
if I don't have a conversation with you about something that's bothering me, how are we supposed to move forward? And yet it is the case, Alan, that most people that I come in contact with are conflict averse. And so by the time somebody huffs or rolls their eyes or says a snarky comment, it's because it's been building and it leaks out. And so it is symptomatic of all this other stuff. And so if I'm trying to read the room, I'm like, oh my gosh, this discontent leaked out of this person. They really are upset, right? And so that
Sure.
this whole narrative that we spin in our own minds, which I just think is a good reminder, first of all, not to do that. So
Yeah. Right.
don't expect anybody to read your mind. If you have a problem, it's up to you to do something about it. But the fact of the matter is at work, we're with people who have all different sort of conflict styles. Very few people are you get what you say. Many people have this subtext, and they're not going to say until, or they're going to be passive aggressive. And so if we want to have a healthy work environment, we have to recognize we have different styles. And so, how can we just say, okay, well, here we're going to talk about these things? And I'm sure the more you have said, I will tell you when there's a problem, and then people see it when there's a problem or where there's something good, and now they trust you that, oh, okay,
Yes.
Alan is going to tell me when things are wrong. I don't have to guess, or when things are right. Then that builds trust by, okay, I don't have to constantly be critiquing, guessing, because my manager, my boss is telling me. So,
Absolutely. You have to be the red hot stove. Okay. The
mhm,
stove's always hot when you touch it. And we fully all of my management, besides some of the newer ones that are still learning how we manage, are learning that, we're the red hot stove. If even if it's a minor thing that I've told you or someone in my staff or team has told you not to do, and we catch you doing it, we're going to tell you again. It's not like you're
mhm,
going to get fired and written up over something minor, but we're still, hey, don't forget, when you're working the pizza kitchen and you're garnishing food, you have to wear a glove. That kind of thing is real. You have to do that. And even though it's not a huge deal, but you have to wear a glove. It's
mhm,
part of the rules or whatever. This is just a small example of something sort of minor that happens. And it's usually just a honest mistake. The manager forgot and we allow our managers to have different managing styles, right? It's not just our way or the highway. As long as you are following our goal of what we're wanting you to do, you can have slightly different managing styles. And you honestly need that because people are going to have strengths and weaknesses, and they're not just going to be able to completely conform to exactly what you want. We're not robots, right? That's what a robot does.
Mhm.
A set of rules, and it follows that exact set of rules to the T. Sometimes managers bend the rules a little bit to smooth something over or whatever, because the restaurant business is so dynamic. It is so dynamic. So many things are constantly changing on a day-to-day basis. People calling in, food prices go up and down, and they move and all that kind of stuff. And so it's a hyper dynamic industry. And I think this is a little off topic, but I think that's what makes them so hard to be successful. It's
Mm,
like, can you also be dynamic with the restaurant?
mm.
And that's why I think that you need different managing styles. That helps you police the craziness of a restaurant. It's like
Right.
Sally is better at talking to people. Uh, John is better at making sure labor is good. You're managing their labor type thing, and you're always going to have those, and you should accept those people's skills and push them to succeed more at whatever, aces in their places. That's the best way
Mhm.
I could say it.
Mm.
Aces in their places.
I love that. And I also really appreciate paying attention to the small. Because I think when it comes to when I show up to a work environment, I show up anywhere, it is the small things that I notice, right? I mean, in any place you've got to make sure that, the environment is set and, the big things are taken care of, but it's the small thing that's giving me a signal if I'm welcomed, if I'm doing the right kinds of things, if I'm being valued. And so to tell somebody that they are not doing something well is a sign of respect so that they can correct it and come back. But it is the case that sometimes, especially, well, I guess it just depends on where you are and if it is your first job, trying to figure out the lay of the land, encouraging people in the correction, like, yeah, this is not that big of a deal, but it is something that needs to happen. And this is just the rule that we have. And so that it's not obviously you're not talking about micromanaging. You're talking about here are the rules. And if there is something that is going wrong, we'll let you know. And we also are going to tell you about the things that are going right, but helping people understand those expectations and knowing that sometimes it's going to sting. That is life. And it
Sure.
actually should sting when we're not doing the right things.
Absolutely. When we do that, I don't just say, "Hey, we don't do that. Don't do it." I explain it. One day I'm thinking of a recent thing, and the guy was trying to do it right. Okay, we ran out of onions. This was at the pizza place. We ran out of onions, and I'm making my pass through around, because that's one of my jobs. I'm looking at everything that everybody's not looking at, right? That's what I'm trying to do, and I'm making my pass through the kitchen, and I see him, and he's over there, and he's chopping an onion pop, 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 as fast as he can. He's not quite that fast at it, but he was chopping an onion. And I walk by and I'm like, stop. I'm like, wait a minute. We don't chop onions here. We don't do that. What is he doing? So I go back to him and I was like, hey man, what do you do? What are you chopping this onion for? Because we don't have any recipes with an onion chop like that in it. And he's like, oh, we ran out of onions for the pizza. And this is one of these food evolution moments. Okay. I'm like, well, that's not how we put onions on our pizza. We thinly slice onions. We have a slicer. It's actually pretty easy to do. You cut the tip off an onion, put it in there, and you rotate it, and it goes, it cuts it up super duper fast. But he didn't know that because he had never done that. And so he was trying to do something right. And I had to be delicate by the way I tell him because I didn't want to discourage him because he
Mhm,
was being a go getter to try to
mhm.
solve a problem. Because that's what a lot of people have problems they have in the younger people have is that they're not problem solvers, right? They struggle being problem solvers. So as soon as we see one, we try to promote like, hey, great job. We always try to catch someone doing something right too. It's not always catching them doing something bad. You always try
Right.
to catch people doing things when they're doing it right. So I had to commend him on, hey, I really appreciate you trying to solve this problem, but you should have went to the manager and communicated, hey, we're out of onions. What do I do? And they would have told you, um, hey, we use the slicer. We slice our onions super thin. And that's how we do it at all of our restaurants. Sammy's got thinly sliced onions. That's a personal preference of mine. I don't like giant chunks of onions on things. So, yeah. But ultimately, it was my fault because that guy didn't get enough training, right? He should have been trained on that. The manager should have trained him, but I should have trained the manager to train him. But that was at the very beginning of our opening, so it was a little chaotic. We're all still learning type thing.
Mm. I love that because for a variety of reasons, you can just, and a lot of times when something is going wrong, well, this is very minor, right? This is not like a personality thing, or that kind of behavior. We say that person's doing something wrong. They should have known better. But then we scapegoat. We don't really understand what happened with them, and we don't understand how to not make it happen again, right? We don't understand the
Sure.
system. Like, where did it break down? And so many times in any kind of conflict, we want to scapegoat the other person. They're causing the pain, they're making the mistake. But I always say, okay, but how was that allowed to happen? Why did they think this is acceptable? What happened in the system so that they are doing this? And
Sure.
it could be nothing at all. Right? Sometimes we just have wild people who do these sorts of things, but many times it's some sort of breakdown, like exactly as you explained. It was, these are the circumstances. This is what happened to the training. Okay, mental note, this is what we're going to do moving forward. And we're going to say, good job for being proactive.
Yeah, and I can tell you exactly what did happen. I did not teach and of course, in our restaurant, sometimes people get afraid and they're learning we empower our managers. Okay, we let them be in control. If somebody comes up, if I'm in the restaurant and someone says, "How do I do this?" or "How does this work?" I always say, "You need to go talk to the manager," right? Because it's their shift, and I'm not. If I tell you you can do
Mhm.
this, and he or she already told so and so they couldn't, then I'm stepping on my manager's toes. I have them in place for a reason because I trust them to be able to pull the job off. So I always tell them go talk to the manager. So at the early stages of a restaurant opening, people are still learning that, or maybe they don't have a ton of experience being a manager, or maybe they don't have a ton of experience being a manager in that type of way, that we empower them. So in this particular case, I failed to tell the guy running the pizza kitchen at the time, hey, do not let your guys leave the line without asking, right? And that's just communication. I don't mean like they can't go use the bathroom. I mean, they just need to, hey, if you're leaving the line, I need to know so that I can manage this area, right? If he would have just said, hey, we're out of onions to the guy running the pizza kitchen, he could have got somebody in cold prep back there because you have more staff back there. They could have been getting onions working, so on and so forth. We don't leave the line. The onions are getting done properly because they were trained how to do it, so on and so forth.
Mhm. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And I could just imagine in such a fast-paced environment, as you said, there's so many places for the leaks. There's so many places
Yeah,
for things to come undone. And so it's probably, as you said, why, for a variety of reasons, the restaurants, it's a hard business, hard to maintain at a high level for such a long time.
sure. You really have to be matter of fact about these things. Hey, you can't leave the line in the moment. Saturday night, there's you're serving 200 guests or whatever, 150 guests in the business and building, and pizzas are flying everywhere. Salads are coming out back there and drinks and all this crazy stuff. And it's like, hey, man, you can't leave the line to go get whatever you need. What do you need? I'll make sure it gets done. That's what the person managing that area is supposed to do, not allowing, the guy slapping out dough to go cut onions.
So you've talked a lot about your management style and treating workers, in this particular way to have a healthy work environment. And I know it's a family-run business, right? So family has its own their own dynamics, right? So how does that play out so that, on many restaurant shows that are family businesses, we see the family yelling at each other, not treating each other well. And then the workers are like, I don't know what to do about this. So, and of course, there are loving families who, but it's family. Family has its own sort of
Sure.
dynamic. So, how have you all found that path to work well with one another in this very high pressure for restaurants business?
Well, anybody that really knows me knows that me and my dad used to butt heads, right? But ultimately, we had an understanding that we were just both trying to do what we thought was right for the restaurant, for the business. And usually, um, the next day, it's over. It's water under the bridge, right? We got over it. But it can be a really just hard dynamic to turn on the switch from family member to and switch back to business partner, right? Sometimes it's harder for other people to switch to, hey, this is my mom and dad, and switch back to business partner and back and forth and not have some sort of conflict.
Mhm.
Um, it is very hard.
Mhm.
That's the best way I can say. It is very hard. But ultimately, the best way to do that is just have someone that is the 51%, right?
Mhm.
They're making the ultimate executive decision. And that's the only way that I know how to do that, is to have that person's like, hey, I took what you said in advisement. I'm thinking about it, but we have to do it this way because
Mhm.
that's what I believe, or whatever. You
Mhm.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
So ultimately, there's got to be somebody in charge
Mhm.
at the end of the day. That's just what I personally believe. It cannot just be a straight up committee. It has to
Mhm.
be someone in charge.
And
That's how we run things.
I also love that, trusting that you have the same vision, maybe different ways of getting it about, but it's easier to water under the bridge when you're like, okay, we're not working at cross purposes. We just are passionate about bringing this about, and we had different visions of
Sure.
bringing it about. So, Alan, my last question for you is as you look into the future of work, what do you think needs to happen so that not only will all workers be treated with dignity and respect, which is just a baseline, but that workers will be encouraged to thrive and flourish?
I think one of the biggest things that comes to mind when you ask that question is, I wish employees would just communicate directly to you when you've hurt their feelings or you said something that's caused them some sort of conflict, right? And and that way they can learn that people are different and they manage different and they talk to people differently. It doesn't mean that they're actually being mean, just because someone like myself who's very matter of fact, like I said, I tell you exactly where you're at. But if I've said something like a scoff or a huff or a sound or anything that's upset you, you should just tell me immediately. Tell me right then, hey, that hurt my feelings. I'm like, whoa, I didn't mean to hurt nobody's feelings. So let's talk about it. I want to smooth that over. I think if people could get better at that anytime, because like you said earlier, they're so conflict adversive. They want to avoid it at all costs. It's like, I wish people could step up to the plate when they actually have felt a negative emotion about some way that's been communicated or something about their job or whatever, and just immediately communicate it so I can explain it. Okay, well, here's why we do that. Something you may not have considered is, we do it this way because I don't want you to get burned. You know what I mean? The people are always trying to find some easier way to do it. It's like, yeah, but if you get burned, it's a horrific event. If you get burned by fryer oil,
Yeah.
it could be life changing.
Mhm.
So we have to do it this way for safety reasons, blah blah blah. And they may not consider that, but ultimately, if people have a problem, I wish they would just immediately talk about it right then and there. Hey,
Mhm.
or at least say, hey, that hurt my feelings. And if we're super busy, I'm like, hey, I promise we'll talk about it right after this rush, this shift, or whatever. We can sit down tomorrow, discuss it, you know, and I just wish that would happen more often.
Yeah. Gosh, I wish that too, right? And that's what we've been talking about communication. So not only empowering managers, but empowering everyday employees to speak up when there's a problem, so that, and the reason people don't do it is because you said they're conflict averse, but it causes more conflict. It's actually
Yeah.
more painful, in the short term and the long run if you don't speak up for yourself because nobody else knows. Nobody knows what it feels like except for you. And so
Yep.
I think you're right. Finding this path forward, empowering everyday workers to speak up without being labeled problematic or snowflake or however we want to belittle somebody, and then empowering employees to say, okay, and listen, and then move forward, right? Without nobody needs to fall apart. Nobody needs to fall out. Having these adult to adult conversations, but the sooner the better, because the sooner is the harm is so much more less.
Absolutely. Even if you don't try to, the person is feeling some type of way, they don't try to resolve the conflict in that moment or in the next 5 minutes. they'll be over there doing something on the line and whispering to the next person, I
Hmm.
can't believe he said that to me or talked to me that way. And then that person's like, I didn't hear it. What are you talking about? And then the game of password begins.
Hmm.
He said this, and I didn't necessarily say it that way, or at least from my perspective, I didn't. You know what I mean?
Right.
And so that can be a game of password. And then that person's like, did you hear? They said this, this, and this. And
Right.
it's changed again. And next thing you know, it's went around the whole restaurant via text message, and it's this horrific thing that didn't happen.
Yeah.
It happens. All goes back to spotting things that cause toxicity.
Yeah.
It's not always, it's rooting it out, but it's not always caused by anything malicious at all. It just
Right.
happens. It
Right.
just spawns out of nowhere, and you've
Yeah.
got to root it out.
Yeah. I agree. Well, Alan, thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute delight talking with you today.
Thank you for having me. It's a great thing. I really enjoyed it, actually.
Wonderful. Well, take care.
You too.
Alan, thank you so much for being on Conflict Managed. A real pleasure to talk with you. And I am just so thankful when I come across people who are really intentionally thinking about what is the employee experience? How can we manage well, treat our managers well, treat our everyday employees well, so that we can, well, first of all, so that we can treat them well, but then also so that we can do the mission of the organization. So thank you so much for taking the time. And I happen to live in the community in which you have invested, and I really appreciate investing in local business. So thank you and your family for doing that. Conflict Managed is produced by third-party workplace conflict restoration services and hosted by me, Mary Brown. You can find us online at 3pconflictrestoration.com. Come back. We have new episodes every Tuesday. And if you want to watch this episode with Alan and I, it's on YouTube at 3P Conflict Restoration. If you haven't had a chance to check out my latest book, How to Be Unprofessional at Work, Tips to Ensure Failure, it's 80 tips of what not to do, considers what to do instead to have a healthy work environment. You can find that on Amazon. And our music is courtesy of Dove Pilot. If you would like and subscribe wherever you're listening or watching this, it'd be very much appreciated. And remember, conflict is normal and expected. Let's deal with it. Until next time, take care.